Welcome to Lynn's Warriors, where truth, action, and advocacy meet. Today, we're extremely honored to speak with Dr. DeWayne Hendrix, a powerful voice for justice, education, and reform. His work challenges systems, empowers communities, and restores hope where it's been lost. So get ready for a conversation that's bold, unfiltered, and deeply needed. Dr. Hendrix currently serves as the founder and CEO of A New Daylight, an organization dedicated to elevating individuals, strengthening families, and transforming systems through faith inspired leadership and practical reform. Dr. Hendrix is the author of Who Are You? See It, Say It, and Seize It, which is based on a mentoring program he created called Mentors for Life. Boy, do we really need that. That program has been implemented across several states and has seen over 1,300 incarcerated individuals complete its requirements. A New Daylight, under his leadership, elevates, 11 participants serving life sentences were granted executive clemency. Again, under his leadership, 11 participants. I want to get that straight with everybody. The website is anewdaylight.com. All of the information, Dr. Hendrix, about you, because it's very extensive and I want to talk to you, will be in the body of this video. So sit back, everybody, and let's welcome Dr. Hendrix to the Warriors.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Hendrix, before we get into, there is so much to talk about and your incredible career, I want to give a shout out to Nancy Grace, because I met you. That's where I first heard you. And then I looked up the work you do, and I was completely fascinated. And I said, I'm going to talk to him because he's a warrior and he needs to be showcased. And I need to find out more about him, because I am really on a mission with the Warriors as well, to bring our boys, our young men, to the fold, so to speak, because with trafficking, exploitation, the work we do at the Warriors, basically we talk about girls and women a lot, but we work with law enforcement and we know the demand is for boys. We know boys are bringing in now 3 times the money than girls. And we need men to mentor and step up, whether it's a father in the household, it's a family member. We have a lot of families, I'm here in New York, that don't have a father figure. So we have to figure out in society how we're going to empower these young men, these boys. And so we're on a mission with that. So when I saw you talking a few times, we've been together on Nancy's show. I'm like, he's a warrior. I'm going to nab him. So thank you, Nancy Grace. Now, before we jump in, let me ask you something. I'm hearing constantly, whether I'm working in Washington, up in my state capital, Albany, this toxic masculinity. Dr. Hendrix, have you been hearing this at all in your work or around town?
Well, I think there's just so much going on with identity right now in our world. You see it in various communities. You're seeing it behind the walls of prisons. Over my 26 years working with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I mean, there's just a big time identity crisis, and I think that was one of the reasons why I titled my book "Who Are You? See it, say it, and seize it," because folks, folks that are my age, in their early 50s, still don't know who they are, don't know their identity, who their true identity is, whether they believe they're a different gender, or if they're trying to find out what their purpose is. And a lot of it has to do with the trauma that they've been involved with in their life. And I think there are various variables, so to speak, to why there's this toxic masculinity or identity crisis out there. A lot of it, some of it has to do with social media, what people see, the lifestyles. Folks post certain things that kind of like the lifestyles of rich and famous, kind of like when I was growing up in the 80s. It was all about the glitz and the glam, the big cars, the big houses, the money, and all the women and all this kind of stuff. And that's what people in my era thought what being a man was. It's like conquering and doing all these different things, which led to behaviors, sometimes criminal behavior, trying to gather and garner all these different things to try to make themselves fit in, so to speak. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now. It's social media is now the lifestyles of the rich and famous, and I just think if folks just don't have those basic fundamentals of critical thinking, being loving themselves in the proper way, then when you come out of your home or you come out of wherever you live, and then you behave in a certain way where you don't have to act like I'm this big bad wolf. in sheep's clothing, because a lot of times the loudest person in the room is probably the weakest one in the room. But so I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now with the toxic
Oh yeah.
masculinity. Is just There's just a big identity crisis going on right now.
Interesting. And I do think the internet has really fueled all of this. And when we talk about our
Mhm,
boys, you know, and our young men, our teens,
mhm,
um, that's where I don't like all of a sudden I'm hearing toxic masculinity thrown at them, right?
mhm,
Or we're hearing this talk of incels, you know,
mhm,
these online rage groups that boys are attracted to. And
mhm.
so I feel like we're right now in America really failing our boys
You know,
and young men. I really do. And I know I'm a woman, I'm a mother of boys, but
mhm,
I just think all of a sudden we're labeling them.
mhm.
That's not a good thing to do.
Well, I have two young sons, and I think one of the things I have to guard against, especially my oldest son, he loves to play game, like he's a gamer, so to speak, and I have to really monitor, the stuff that he's playing and watching in these chat rooms about the
Yes.
games that he likes. And I don't want to say any specific brands, but I mean, there it's like it sounds like a good game. Oh, that's harmless. But then they have these YouTube channels and all this kind of stuff, and it really takes kids on a dark path. So really, a lot of this stuff is back to fundamentals. What goes on in your four walls. Monitoring, loving your children. Giving them space to grow and learn, but also
Yeah.
making sure that they're doing what they need to do on a day-to-day basis. Teaching them the right skills, teaching them how to love themselves, how to love others, how to behave, how, just those things that we all learned, or what we should have learned in elementary school. Uh, so it's in terms of just boys and men, because one of the things that I struggle with, growing up, I grew up in a time when I saw neighbors, a lot of domestic issues, in my community. And it was during a time where women were really seen as objects, and not necessarily as full human beings, and just saying, hey, that kitchen and bedroom, so to speak, attitude. And then as we saw society make some changes, and women have, in corporate America, whether it's in leadership, government leadership, nonprofit, for-profit organizations, some of my best bosses have been women. I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting here on your platform today. um, but I think as society has changed, sometimes some things haven't changed in terms of the social status of women. Some people still see women as objects, even in the workplace, even in leadership. And I think I have a big time issue with that. So
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
because, just because it was okay, and I would never say it would be okay to ever hit a woman or be disrespectful or anything like that. But it was a time in our society where that was normal. And it's unfortunate that in the silent generation, and maybe even some of the baby boomers experienced that. But I'm a Gen X, and then you have millennials and Gen Z. Of course, I mean, there's rules and there's laws and different things of that nature that, no, it's not okay to do that, and you're going to go to jail. But unfortunately, some of those conversations, like when laws change, culture should change before the laws, because at the end of the day, no one should be like, oh, put your hands on this person or do this or do that or disrespect, or this person is less than, because 100 years ago women couldn't vote, or women couldn't even I didn't realize women couldn't even have a bank account in the early 70s without
Yes.
the permission of their husband. So
Yes.
just because society says something is okay, it doesn't mean it is okay. So, and it's just like what we spoke about earlier with the identity crisis. It's just about basic human decency, treating people with respect, treating people with love. And again, it all always starts with self-love first, and then you go out and then you go about doing your business on a day-to-day basis. And my mom, one of the traits that she would always say, charity starts at home
Mhm.
and then spreads abroad. So, I think what you're doing is very important, is vital. to make a difference in our communities, to help lower the incarceration rates. Because when, young men and boys don't know how to treat one themselves, and then they don't know how to treat women, and then when women does not receive self-love and self-respect, then they think being treated a certain way is okay because someone is showing them affection, or because they're not getting it either from their father or grandfather figure or some male figure in their life to help show them value in the home. And then when they start getting it through other means, then it's like, oh, it's okay if this person put their hands on me because
Right.
at least they're providing me a home. So
Right.
self-love
That's
is
the thing.
very important. So yeah.
Okay, so now you opened up the can of worms where I have 50 questions for you. I do want to go back on something because we do
Sure.
extensive work at the Warriors on legislation for child safety
Mhm.
in Washington. We're working on something right now called the Kids Online Safety Act. And I just want to point out every platform is rife with sexual exploitation. Every platform, we have everything I say is based, we have studies, we have everything, facts. Um, for instance, if you go into the Apple App Store, we tested 200 apps with ages, right? It used to be like the movies, if it would say like, teen or mature audience, like we kind of just went by whatever they told us, right?
Mhm.
We have 93% of what is, say 4 plus, 8 plus, 12 plus in that app store inappropriate. There's sexual content, there's violence. So we can't trust big tech. We just have to all, as parents, as citizens, we have to do the work. We have to take those few minutes to investigate, even if something says, okay, 12 plus or something like that, to really see what that game is about. Really take the time. And that's what we're missing a lot of now, that everybody's busy and overwhelmed and trying to pay bills and things like that. Uh, we're missing. That's a missing link. That's number one. And then number two, I want to ask you before we keep going, you have an incredible background. Do you want to share any of that with us? Because I have to say, Dr. Hendrix, I ask myself, how did you end up like this?
Mhm.
And I'm very
Well,
serious when I say, thinking like this. It's a very forward way of thinking, a very common sense way of thinking, a very passionate way of thinking. I know a little bit about your background, and that is why you are truly a warrior. And I wanted to speak with you and share your voice.
thank you for having me, and again, thank you for the opportunity. My father passed away in August of a couple of months ago,
Oh, I'm
and
so sorry.
yeah, and he was 86 years old, and and he was, I would think, just an incredible person, not just a father, but just an incredible human being. And I think of all the experiences that we've had together, at his memorial service a couple weeks ago, I gave him a tribute, and I talked about this time that he spanked me in church. I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. I was supposed to be singing in the angel choir, and I was sitting in the back pew with my brother and two sisters, and he walked into church and he saw me not up there with the other kids, and he literally yanked me from my seat and whooped me all the way to the choir stand. And he's whooped me many times, but that was probably the most important discipline I got, because he was like, look, if you're going to be a member of this church, you're going to participate, and when you commit to doing something, you're going to commit to it. And he was about relationships, whether it was family, friends, community, his work, and all of that. But I mentioned that that was the greatest thing that he ever did for me, because it made me understand the seriousness about my life, my salvation, and that nature.
Interesting.
So that was very poignant for me. And other deacons, he was a deacon, so there were other deacons in the church who for some reason, people just looked out for me. Even the gangsters in the neighborhood was like, you are going to do something good. You're not going to be out on this corner. You're not going to sell
Wow.
drugs. You're not going to be out here running around. You're going to do something with yourself. And I've just kind of had these guardian angels surrounded me, even though I've been around a lot of different things, especially my two older brothers who were incarcerated in California and in Michigan for several years. And I got into corrections. I was a criminal justice student. at a local college, and had a free internship at the female federal prison there in Dublin, which is now closed. Man, that could be a whole nother Lynn's Warriors conversation about the
Yeah.
exploitation of female inmates and staff improprieties and doing
Yes.
all kind of things with women. And my folks just taught me I'm not a perfect person, and by no stretch of the imagination, but they've always taught me about integrity and not just doing things the right way when people are looking, but doing the right thing when it may cost you something. And I've missed out on a whole lot of opportunities in my career, in my life, because I chose not to, do certain things just to get along, to go along. And, someone asked me, when did you think you became a leader? And the other moment, other than when my father spanked me, was when a drug dealer who was a couple of years older than me, I was 10 years old, he asked me to sell drugs for him. And I told him no. And he was like, okay, you know, and he never bothered me or anything after that.
Wow.
And the fact that I could stand up to that guy and just tell him no. Yeah, I know I'm only getting $4 an hour. I mean, $4 every 2 weeks from my parents for an allowance. I'll just take my little $4 and keep going. I'm not gonna, fall into this trap of selling drugs and doing different things of that nature. Um, so it's been about that. And then when I actually got into corrections, um, I've always been about reentry, but also been about people being stand up. And, as long as you take responsibility, I will try to teach and coach and do what you need to do to be a better person. And that's when we came up with the Mentors for Life program in here in Memphis, a federal correctional institution. I was an associate warden there at the time, and I brought in 50. It was 100 life inmates with life sentences at Memphis. So we brought them into the chapel, and I said, what if you guys could create a different legacy for your life? That it's not just going to be about being in prison forever, and that you can coach and mentor younger inmates who have release dates and you don't, and you can make a difference in their life. 50 of them walked out right away. It's like, we don't want no parts of this. I don't have time. I got life. I ain't got nothing to look forward to. The other 50 said yes, and we started that program. And you mentioned the stats a little bit earlier, and some of those guys were actually able to come home through President Obama and President Trump. And I'm very proud of that program because, at the end of the day, people make mistakes, but if you do the right thing, you understand the victim impact that you've had, if depending on what type of crime they committed, but also their families, because a couple of the inmates who, when they first started it, they had never even thought about the impact that their incarceration had on their own family and their kids. So one guy had a daughter write him a letter and talked about how he wasn't picking her up from school, he wasn't there for recitals and plays and sporting events and different things of that nature. And because sometimes inmates could be so self-centered about and narcissistic about their own process that they hadn't even thought about the impact that it had on their community, their family, and the people that they harmed while they were in the community. So that's where it all starts. They have to be willing to not just say it like, hey, I want to get out of jail, so yeah,
Yeah.
I care about this and that. But so it's very important for me to deal with people, look them in the eye and say, look, if you really want to make a difference in your life, you can, but it starts with accepting responsibility and creating a new vision for your future.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to ask you about your mentoring, but you kind of answered it
mhm,
all for me. Do you think, because we have many programs that we're going to have to do, because I have a lot of subjects for you,
mhm,
in my opinion,
mhm,
look, the whole prison system, and you're the expert here, not me. It's a really for-profit business.
mhm,
That's the way I look at it. I've always looked at it. I also know on any given night there are 2,000 minors in adult jails across the country or thereabouts. I don't think we should have kids in. And when I've challenged or asked questions, I'm told we have nowhere else to put them. I don't think a child should be in a jail, right?
Mhm.
What do you have to say about all of that? I mean, can you speak about that at all? How about I'm always thinking about also there has to be men and women too, you know, wrongly incarcerated. They did not do the
Mhm.
crime.
Mhm.
We're not talking. I guess because we were on with Nancy a lot for as I called him, Dirty Diddy,
Mhm.
which I called him for years before all of this. Okay,
Yeah.
and I kept thinking, like, what about all those people we're never talking about? We're never addressing. We're never questioning. We're never getting answers to. What do you have to say about any of that?
Well, I agree. Two things can always be true. I mean, I do think we're in an over incarcerated society. Spending many, I worked at 9 different institutions in my 26
Wow.
year career across the country. And I would say 45 to 50% probably could have been in rehab or some sort of transitional housing or something other than spending 10 or 15 years for drug crimes, and a lot of them are nonviolent crimes. uh Only the issue that I have with my answer is that sometimes folks don't use their time wisely when they do get arrested and do spend a little bit of time incarcerated. And in my book, I talked about, time, the T in time is talent. All inmates have talent. They may not be as talented as someone else, but every person, our creator gave us all gifts. The I in time is intelligence. Everyone has some level of intelligence. And
Mhm.
then when you're incarcerated, you have to use that your time wisely. So the M in time is managed. So whatever issues that you have, and I would tell inmates this in admission and orientation. So if you have anger issues, if you have financial literacy issues, if you're having family issues, whatever those issues are, address them, but also enhance the strengths that you already have. So that way, when you do go get back out, you're not coming back, because 70% of the people who end up incarcerated end up circling back into the system. And then the E in time is expectation. You have to have the expectation that life is going to be better once you get out. Um, Unfortunately, the culture of prison, that's the what I have the issue with in terms of the gang culture. Having to choose. You can't just go in and do your time. You have to choose what we call a car or a gang or something. You got to be affiliated with something or someone in order for your time to go as it should. So you have the judgment of, hey, you have to go behind this wall, but then you got to deal with the subculture of dealing with other inmates. And that's the culture that I like to see change, because anything you get in the streets, you're gonna get it behind that wall. There is it's business going on in there
Well, why?
all
But
day to
why?
every day.
Yes. Why is this allowed, Dr. Hendricks? We know it. We see it. I've heard about this for years. You obviously you worked there. You witnessed it firsthand. Is it just it's about money? If you want to get really crass and break it down to it's just allowed, people get paid off, or just it's been like this. Why rock the
It
boat? Let
it
it go. Like it's too hard to clean it up. Like, well, why?
it mirrors society, unfortunately. And it's no different than, I grew up in a neighborhood called Sobrani Park. There are certain things that go on in that community that the people in the community allow to happen. And it doesn't necessarily have to involve the authorities, so to speak. And it's the same thing in the prison system. And staff have a lot of a part in that. I mean, I'll give you an example as far as like where sex offenders are housed in a housing unit. I remember going into my last facility, and I'm not going to say where it is. And we had inmates. The inmates were dictating to the counselors where the inmates were going to live. So all the sex offenders had to live in what they call a sex offender row in the units. And and they couldn't live anywhere else because no one wanted to have a sex offender in their cell with them. So, and it's just this give and take, like, okay, you give us this, we'll give you that, and there'll be peace. And if this doesn't happen, and then this person's going to get assaulted. So So it took us about 3, 4 months to start making rotations. I mean, I had one guy living in his cell for 15 years. That, just 15 years. Like, hey, this is my cell. This is where I live, and no one's gonna tell me where I'm not gonna be. And the staff, so they don't have no issues with these folks, they let it happen sometimes. So it's just like any other thing or any other business. Unfortunately, when you're talking about prisons, you're talking about life and death. So and then the other part that I would like to see different is in terms of, and I know we talked a lot about food and what Diddy was eating and that kind of thing, but the big business of commissary and most of the things that are served on commissary are things with high in sugar, high in fat, high in sodium. And we all know it, just like in certain communities in our country, you got these corner stores that are selling all these sugary drinks, all the stuff with sodium, and all these things create chronic issues. So if you go in, and let's just say you're a healthy person, you're there for a couple of years, but then you buying, all the sugary stuff, drinking all these sugary drinks and high sodium, and now you got diabetes, you got high blood pressure, and then that hurts our healthcare system, right? But it's big money in institutions as it relates to the commissary sales, because again, if you're talking about maintaining what we call peace or quietness, hey, let them have their sodas and that'll let them go back to their cell and just let them be. And then when they get out, they get out. So yeah, two things can be true. It is a big business because you have the private sector as well. So yeah, but there can definitely be some changes made to how we operate our facilities, but we also have to make changes in our organizations, excuse me, in our communities, and organizations like yourself that's bringing awareness to victim impact and people behaving in a better way, and treating one another with dignity and looking out for each other. Because I mean, how many young women and girls that are missing in New York and some of our urban communities that people aren't even talking about?
That's why
You
that was
know?
part of, yes, that was
Yeah.
part of my breaking down the other day, just because, look, here, this is the fact, Dr. Hendricks, here in New York, most of the trafficked girls are of color. That's just, those are the stats, right? So we're not talking about them at all. I've also been told, I'll never forget when I first started this and didn't know anything in Washington. I just thought, I'm going to go to Washington and just keep introducing myself to people and build this, warriors community, right? I thought everybody could get on board with this: missing kids, exploited kids, trafficked, right? And then I found out, no, right? No, it's definitely sort of weaponized. It's dark, it's ugly. People don't want to deal with it if they don't have to deal with it. But I'll never forget one of my very first meetings. I use no names or organizations. He looked at me and said, "Those are throwaway kids, not even worth looking for." A national leader. And
Mm,
that is what fueled me, Dr. Hendricks, when I heard that from the so-called big experts, big organization. I thought, my goodness, then I'm going to do something. If it's one person a day, one family a day,
mhm,
one discussion a day, I'm just going to do it. And that's going to be my goal, one a day. And I'm just going to keep chipping away at it. But that is what fueled me. When this man sat across from me in this big fancy conference room and said that to me, I thought, how could somebody say throwaway? That's just that, you know, and
right.
it fueled my being a warrior even more. But um, so how, we're opening up the can of worms. There's so many different things here. How do we go about right now, 2025?
Mhm,
What do you want to do? We have to start reversing this culture. I always start with, we have to just start talking about it and let people know what's going on, and then they have to talk about it.
mhm,
But let's get back to the boys and young men. I mean, they're kind of branded right now,
mhm,
toxic. They're deluged, not their fault. Watch your sons, pornography. They're not even looking for it. It'll come across their feeds because we do all
mhm,
this work, the algorithms. Violence, the
mhm,
predators. They'll meet the kids on the DMs, the direct messages. That's what they're doing on it's not one platform, it's every platform has predation. Okay. How are we going to start changing this culture? We are right now, this is a national crisis. How do we start?
Well, like you said, it's a conversation. I mean, you talking about algorithms and things of that nature. For me, growing up, it was, you know, family members, uncles having all these magazines under their bed and this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, what is this, uncle? What's all of this stuff here that you got going on? So just having
Mhm.
those conversations about, again, when women are looked at as objects, and if you're taught that conquering and doing these things make you more of a man, hey, I was a young college student, I went through that same process, so it's just one of those things where you have to be able to be vulnerable and have conversations. I mean, even talking about generational trauma in families when, things happen, kids are molested or whatever. And it's like, no, don't
Right.
talk about that. We keep that hush hush. We don't. And then all of a sudden now folks are grandparents and they went through things and now they can't even talk about it to their kids and their grandkids because some of them came from that silent generation where you just don't talk. And now, we talk about Gen Z and the millennials. They say, oh, they say everything. They just blurt out everything. And there's got to be a balance between, you know, having an understanding of what the birds and the bees really truly are and how this impacts people's lives throughout the generations. Because it's unfortunate that, again, when young men and young women aren't taught to be self-loved, so to speak, then they go about doing things in a way to get the affection and attention and recognition from places that they really shouldn't. So it starts in the home, and it has to be having those conversations. But then if it does not happen, then organizations like yourselves, like a new daylight, just being able to create environments where people can have just sit in a small circle and just say, hey,
Yeah.
what we say here, if no one's going to be self-harmed, if there's no criminal activity going on here, you can just be vulnerable and talk, because that's what we did with the Mentors for Life. We had African American inmates, white inmates, Hispanic inmates, people from all over the country. And we're just sitting in a circle and just having discussions about manhood and what life is like for them and what their perspectives are, and just seeing things in a different way just by having a conversation and not just having to sit back and say, I got to be tough, or I got to go out and I got to hurt somebody, or I got to shoot somebody to prove how tough I am and how much of a man I am. So I just think, yeah, we're in 2025, we're in a technological age and all of that stuff, but it all comes back to the same thing, just being basic, good human beings. And then when we make mistakes, we make amends, we take responsibility for it. And then we go about garnering, one of the things that my folks would always say, like we were acting, but get a grip, get a hold of yourself. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Because one of the affirmations in my book is, when I'm depressed, I will get a grip. I will stop feeling sorry for myself and get a grip. And a friend of mine was like, well, what is a grip? What do you mean get a grip? And I was like, well, you garner a positive response for your internal pain, because that's basically what depression is. So, but again, you have to have avenues to
Right.
go and ask somebody for help, and seek help. So, having this conversation that we're having right now, and like you said, being able to collaborate and not be in these silos and not try to say, well, my organization is doing this and your organization is doing that, and let's compete for whatever funding we can get. But really, truly coming together and figuring out how, if you have a client, then they do go through your process, and then if they need to come over here to do something or go somewhere else, so it could be a continuum of care.
Yes.
Because what I realized working in law enforcement, I ended up, when I worked in New York, I ended up going to counseling due to a staff suicide when I first got to Brooklyn. And I realized that it's not just about seeking help for 6 sessions or 6 months or even a year. It's about continuing the conversation,
Yes.
all the time. It may not be the same thing, but just to check in. Are you okay? How are you seeing things? And I just think, it's good that we're in an age where people are seeking more mental health treatment and things of that nature. But I just think there should be multiple conversations going on in our lives and multiple resources that we could reach out to when we're having different issues. And in that way, it may stop one person from being trafficked. It may stop one person from pimping some young lady. It may stop one person from sexually assaulting a girlfriend or their family member or whatever.
Yeah,
So it's
we have
just
to.
important that we keep these conversations going.
Yeah, and we really have to look at so many different things that you mentioned. But I keep thinking about, we have so many families. There is nobody looking at that child. We've got, teens supporting their younger siblings.
Mhm.
We have, one parent household. We have drug addled household. All of this vulnerability leads to the exploitation, the trafficking, the gangs saying, deliver these drugs for me. I'll give you $100.
Right.
Most kids are going to do it. They want to feed their siblings, feed themselves, right?
Hmm.
They're meeting somebody online who tells them, they're pretty or they're handsome. Or I don't know about you, but I have every security feature on my phone, Dr. Hendrix, and I'm still getting, you can make $1,500 a day and work 1 hour. And how many, no,
Right.
we know that's a scam. I shouldn't laugh
Hmm.
about it.
Right.
But how many 16-year-old girls or boys are going to press on that and think, oh,
Mhm.
maybe there's something there for me?
Right.
And there's so much predation in our society. How do we get at those kids? This is something I cannot answer, and I'm usually not at a loss for words.
Hmm.
How do we look out for those kids? Because they're really falling through the cracks,
Well,
right?
I
And
think
I don't know how to do that except get everybody else involved, but people are not getting involved.
In our community, especially, and I can speak to more of the urban communities. I know when I was growing up in the late '70s, early '80s, mid '80s, we had the neighborhood I grew up in. It was a very tight knit group of people, even though we had drugs and alcohol and everything else going on, but there was still, a close knitness to our community. I played sports, so I had coaches. I mean, at the church, I had the deacons, and then the ladies, the elderly ladies, and so it was just people constantly in our ear saying, "Stay focused, do this, do that, do the other." And I just don't. That's what's missing, I think, in a lot of our urban
Yeah.
communities now, because I was having a conversation with one of my sisters yesterday, and I'm like, these folks that are like my age, 50 and in 60s and 70s, I'm seeing some of these folks still going out and hanging out like they're in their 20s and 30s. So, the grandmothers.
And they're on TikTok dancing. I don't want to interfere.
Right.
Like, no wonder the kids, like, they're seeing, like, the parents, family members, 50, 60 dancing crazy dances to Taylor Swift or somebody on TikTok.
Yeah, so it's just like man, they're going to talk about this generation of grandmothers. The history books is going to mention these folks later, but I just think there's just not that group of mature people that are able to reach these younger kids, because a lot of these kids they're not going to Sunday school anymore. They're not going to mass. They're not, they're just kind of hanging out in there wherever they live, and they're just on their own. And like you said, they have their phones, and that's, we're more in a virtual world. And there's probably, and the algorithm is not going to allow, let's just say, a Lens Warriors, like if you had a Lens Warriors app and you were posting certain positive things on a day-to-day basis.
Dr. Hendricks, you mentioned about kids are no longer really going to church or Sunday school, or I like to say kind of that place to land.
Mhm,
Um, I found it interesting, and this is not even about, this whole situation we saw recently with Charlie Kirk. And then
mhm,
we saw, like, all these, I didn't even know, like, all these young people kind of showing up and expressing emotion about that, or showing their Christianity, or I just was kind of taken aback. I knew about Charlie Kirk, but I didn't really know there was this tremendous following. And I talked to a lot of um, kids across the country after this, and they were impacted by, like, I didn't even know because they were telling me, like, even if they didn't follow him or they weren't religious or anything, he was constantly on TikTok. So he was
Hmm.
kind of in their face. So they all knew about him, which
Hmm.
I didn't even know that he was on TikTok that much. So that got me thinking that how does, with the work you do, have done, and yourself, and prison, because I've noticed in human trafficking, which I really call the enslavement of people. I think it's much more descriptive. They are enslaved, right? Um, they find religion. They become very, they talk about God a lot. How is faith involved in all of this? I've given you kind of a splattering. I've thrown a lot at you, but speak a little bit about faith today with everything going on.
Well, it's a tough thing, because like I said, I mentioned earlier, folks aren't really seeking, getting into their faith or the lack thereof. I know, like I said, when folks go to jail, especially I can just speak for my brothers when they went to prison. A lot of times when they would write, they would really express their feelings and their connection to their faith during that time, because it was tough being behind bars and being away from family, being away from what on a day-to-day basis. um and I think that just it's almost kind of like being going through like a desert experience, yet you're around other people every day. um and then some of them, sometimes some people go, whether it's Christianity or Islam, some of it's based on the people they connect with, whether it's a cellmate or whether it's a group of individuals that they meet on the compound. And for me, I think faith brings discipline, because
Mhm.
again, faith is things for hope for, things not necessarily seen. So that's to me what true faith is, and having that expectation of, okay, if I can align myself with something, give me that discipline, and then I can go forward to be a positive person and make an impact and make a difference.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of what we're missing in our society, just just that day-to-day faith that I don't have to be rude to get ahead, or I don't have to cut somebody off to get ahead, or I don't have to get on TikTok or some other website to do something strange to make money. Um, because again, cutting corners is so easy, because it's the easiest. And then when you're desperate, when I, again, speaking about urban communities, when you're desperate, you do desperate things. And
Yes.
then all of a sudden now you're in a deficit, because now you're in the system. And yeah, you can, and then if you can't afford a lawyer to, have a really, really good argument, because most public defenders are there to get a plea agreement. But again, once you got a felony and all that record, now is that you got to check the box. It's hard to get employment and different things. It just, your life turns, it just spirals out of control. I know you mentioned young kids being, juveniles being held with adults, so it's this, the system is rigged for people to fail once you get in the wheel. The thing is, organizations like Lynn's Warriors and a New Daylight and others, we're trying to get people from getting in the system, because once you
Yeah.
get in it, it's just so difficult to get out of it. So, I think creating, and that was for me. Like I said, I got whooped in church at 6, 7, 8 years old, and if I didn't know the importance of having faith and being serious about who I am and what I'm going to be when I get older as a child, I mean, who knows what my life would have been like had I not had that discipline and the faith of a father who was willing to embarrass himself and whoop me, because I think I didn't see anybody else's parents whooping their kid in the church at all. Um, but I did grow up in a time when the teachers did spank us a little bit, but
Well,
um,
you can't even say
yeah,
that today. This is
right.
just,
I know. So
it's
it's
like,
just,
yeah.
yeah. So it's almost as if, you know, you got to almost have folks, more people like yourself that's willing to stick your life, not necessarily your life, but I mean your professionalism and your passion and your heart, and you putting it on the line to save the next generation. Because if there aren't people like yourself doing the work you're doing, then what is our world going to look like in 10 or 15 years based on the exploitation of technology and everything else that we're seeing? So
Yeah, and based, Dr. Hendricks, on the work you're doing as well, because it is about not slapping a Band-Aid on. It's about getting in there to, educate, intervene, again, talk, no matter how difficult the conversations are. Because I always tell parents and guardians, family members, the kids are hearing and seeing everything online anyway. So
mhm.
you be that leader and you give them the information and the facts. But I do want to give you some hope that the alpha generation, and they're very young, they're born in 2010.
Okay.
So the oldest they can be is 15 now.
Okay.
We have some initial studies. They are going back to faith. They're seeking faith. And these are young kids. They're seeking, going to libraries, reading actual books, and they're also putting down the devices more. So we live in a digital world. That's not going away. We don't want it to go away, right? We're talking to
Right.
each other now,
Right.
right? It's here, right? But everybody can get off the devices.
Mhm.
We always say 15 minutes a day you start with. The entire
Right.
family, you have to lead by example. But they're showing this already. So I find this very hopeful because those are our future adults and future leaders. And we work with a lot of kids that are 20 to 25. And they're angry, Dr. Hendricks, that this whole online was like pushed at them,
Mhm.
and their surroundings, whether it's social, whether it's education, you got to be online, you got to do everything online, and they're starting to fight back. So
Mhm.
we have some groups because they don't want their siblings or younger kids to be exposed to content they saw that is
Mhm.
horrific type of things.
Right.
Finish us up with, I have two things I want to ask you.
Mhm.
And again, promise me you'll come back because we have a lot
Yes.
of different things to talk about. And I would like to extensively then do something on the justice system because
Yes.
I'm getting a lot of people writing to me about different things. A lot of women, especially, you mentioned before about women, um, and talk about that a little more. But for today's purposes, I wanted to kind of focus on boys and men, and
Mhm.
how we have to keep talking about this, and it's okay to talk about it. And if you could redesign right now, it's kind of a loaded question, the educational system for boys, like academically, emotionally, spiritually, what
Mhm.
what would your program look like, Dr. Hendricks?
Well, the first thing that we all need when we wake up in the morning is good health. And as long as kids have access to health care and if they're not feeling well, that's the first thing. And then the second thing is a quality education, meaning the classrooms aren't, 50 kids in a room.
Yeah.
So kids should, well, before we even get to education, kids got to have access to clean water and healthy foods. Because
Mm.
again, if you're not eating, kids aren't even eating breakfast in the morning. Most kids during the summer, they don't even have access to food. So once you have your health care, you have your clean water and healthy foods, now we can talk about a quality education, learning, get the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic. And then from there, I'd like to talk about conflict resolution. I was bullied as a kid, and a lot of it had to do with these two kids that their mother was murdered in front of them, and I had no idea they were from the neighborhood, but I didn't know their mother had been murdered in front of them from a domestic partner, and they were kind of their clothes were a little dingy. They didn't always smell the best, and here I am, this kid smiling all the time, and they like, we're gonna bully this guy because he shouldn't be happy. He needs to feel like we feel.
Mm.
And when you don't have conflict resolution, you can have all the health and all the food and all of that, but if you can't deal with people, it's going to be difficult to make advancements in life. So, and then you're talking about in every community, everyone should have an opportunity to be an entrepreneur, whether it's
Mm.
small businesses. They need to see people in their community. Like, when I lived in New York, I didn't have to go anywhere outside of my neighborhood. You had the cleaners, you had the bank, you had restaurants, you had the doctors. I mean, you had, all your resources were in each neighborhood in every borough. of New York. And I just was like, oh, this is what community should really look like. And then uh, from there, as far as law enforcement and the other agencies that are getting that are involved in communities, there should be positive, like what I call self-care, um, training in terms of wellness and different things of that nature. Because to me, the police should be the last organizations that should be called to deal with issues. Things should be handled within the home for the most part. But if it can't be handled, then that's when you involve the cops. But the police need to be involved in that process of knowing people, the community policing. And one of the things that I was a part of in Oakland, in my neighborhood, they had the Police Activities League. So they would come to my junior high and they come and they play basketball with us. They would take us to Oakland A's games or even the Golden State Warrior games and just spend time. So we start seeing them not just as task force showing up to knock down doors and find drugs, and that's when I really thought like, oh, maybe I could be a cop one day. Maybe I can get in law enforcement. So having folks, because working in this business for 26 years, the average lifespan for a correctional worker is only 59 and a half, and the mandatory retirement age is 57. So there's some issues there. So if you got people working in this industry and the police is only like 60 or something, like police officers about 60, 61. So if you're talking about communities that the average lifespan for the people who protect and serve is only 60, they can't even draw Social Security, most of them. And then you have young urban folks, people that I grew up with, most of them didn't even live to be 21. So it's just a lot of chaos going on there. And so for me, it's about health, it's about access to clean water, healthy foods, conflict resolution, and then being able to be entrepreneurs in your own communities or wherever that you want to be, and having the police and other civic organizations that serve these communities. These folks have healthy lives, so that way they're serving the community and not just saying, "Oh, I'm collecting a check," and that's just that. So
Yeah.
to me, that's my holistic view of a thriving community.
I'm glad you used the word holistic because it really
Mhm.
boils down to a lot of holistic type things for the healing,
Mhm.
the feeling better. That's another program for the
Right.
holistic that we
Yeah.
need to talk about. We need to talk
Right.
about the trauma. People have to understand what true trauma is,
Hmm.
how we touched a little bit upon it, how it really stays for life, basically. It's
Hmm.
it's always there somewhere, even if it doesn't rear its ugly head, how it affects a whole family, all of these issues, incarceration,
Hmm.
trafficking, any form of exploitation online. Finish this up with this, Dr. Hendricks. If a young man is listening to you right now
Hmm.
and he feels very defeated because there's a lot of negativity, we talk to a lot of boys and young men in today's world. It's just, they see it online, the news, it's
Hmm.
just in culture, it's on the streets, whatever. What do you want to tell them?
I'm gonna give him my affirmation creed. I am somebody. Although others have labeled me worthless, I know my value. My current situation will not deter me from living out my purpose. To create total wellness, I will take advantage of all educational, recreational, and spiritual learning opportunities available to me. I take responsibility for my past, present, and future actions. When I'm rejected, I will keep a cool head. When I am depressed, I'll stop feeling sorry for myself and get a grip. I will not give up. I will continue to press forward. I will act in accordance with my rights, duties, and privileges as a citizen and be a contributing member to my community. I will make a difference. So, being able to affirm yourself, finding positive, there's someone positive in your community somewhere, find them, connect with them, stay with them, hold on to them until you can continue to grow and expand your network. Because at the end of the day, you are God's creation. You are somebody, and you are here for a purpose, and you have a plan for your future. It's up to you to do the things that you need to do to get things done.
All I can say is amen to that. To finish up with that. Well, I want to make sure everybody knows they'll take their time. I'll put all of your information, a link to your book, everywhere they can find you and follow you. Certainly, anewdaylight.com is the website. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm glad we're connecting. We need to connect more and share more information. There is always a light at the end of the tunnel. There's always somebody, you have to find them, as you said, to reach out to. There is help. There are resources. So follow along, everybody. We are here to do the heavy lifting for you. We want you to be warriors in your own homes and communities. And Dr. DeWayne Hendrix, I can't thank you enough. You are a true warrior in every sense of the word. I really mean that. You're a man of vision, faith, courage, who's refusing to give up. You have a smile on your face. That is the thing. To go back to Nancy Grace, I'm like, oh boy, look. When I looked up, the work you do and all that, I'm like, wow, he's always smiling. And smiling is infectious, right? It
Yes.
makes other people smile. I'm like, that's a good thing, because I'm just seeing a lot of sad faces usually around me. And so your work reminds us that transformation begins really with truth, discussion, leadership, and love, and that every life can be redeemed, right? When we have purpose and purpose over despair.
Yes.
So from all of us at Lynn's Warriors, thank you for standing tall in a time when strength and morality, we didn't talk about morality too much, we'll do that next time, are really under siege, I think. And you're proof that one determined warrior can change the world and also inspire others to do that. So Dr. Hendrix, please promise me we will speak again. There are so many issues we must talk about. We must, protect our kids. We must empower our boys and young men. And it's just an honor to speak with you. Thank you, Dr. Hendrix.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, and we'll speak again soon.
Yes.